coming on the air with a dramatic ruling that could reshape the border crisis, with the Supreme Court green-lighting a Texas law that would let local police arrest migrants. That's a huge change from how it is now, with only the feds having that authority. The latest front in Texas's battle with the Biden administration and whether other states could do the same coming up. Then Russia's planning its own Olympics after getting kicked out of the regular one because of its invasion of Ukraine and a state-sponsored steroid scandal. We'll explain this latest example of how some countries are using sports washing to try to rebuild their image. Also tonight, new data shows more people using medication abortion, just as the Supreme Court is about to hear arguments to ban access to it. How doctors nationwide are telling patients to prepare. Plus, the beloved brand behind Chunky Monkey ice cream now on the market. We'll explain why and what's causing Americans to get pickier about our pints. And new evidence of more royal Photoshop fails. This one now involving the late Queen Elizabeth. A deep dive on the edits our photo team found. And then the question, how does this keep happening? That's later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we're coming on the air with a big deal decision by the Supreme Court, letting a Texas immigration law go into effect that now gives the state more power than we have ever seen. Specifically, it gives local police in Texas the power to arrest anybody illegally crossing the border. Up until now, only the feds really had that power. The White House says they fundamentally disagree with this decision on a law that they say is just another example of Republican officials politicizing the border. You see it there. Now, the reason this is such a big deal is because it has a huge impact. And think of it in like two buckets here. The first, what we could see play out in Texas. It's the Texas bucket. Legal experts say there's a whole lot of uncertainty around how this plays out because this is unprecedented. It hasn't been done before at a state level. Migrant rights groups are now calling it the most extreme anti-immigrant law ever passed. They're worried it'll lead to a lot of racial profiling, since local police can now question and investigate people suspected of having entered the U.S. illegally. Then there's bucket number two, beyond Texas. It's the national impact, and this goes beyond immigration, too. Could other states pass laws to give them power that the federal government typically only has? The court here was split on this decision right along ideological lines, with the three more liberal justices arguing against this. With Justice Sonia Sotomayor in the dissent, writing, "This gives a green light to overturn precedent, and in her words, sow chaos." Now, Texas's Attorney General today posting this is a huge win over the Biden administration and the ACLU, who have both been fighting this law. I want to bring in Julia Ainsley for more on this. So big deal moving forward. The law could still end up blocked later, but in the meantime, there are some real immediate implications here. Talk us through it.
Yeah, that's right. This is a stay, Hallie, and it's a bit of a whiplash because last night we thought that this law was on hold indefinitely. But as it turns out, that was just to give the justices a little more time, really less than 24 hours, to get their three differing opinions out. We know Justice Coney Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett wanted to have her own opinion. There was also the dissent. And then the majority said that they think that the stay should remain in order to minimize the harm of this law not going into effect. That's a little unusual, but they said that it's really because of the way that the Fifth Circuit put their stay in. It was not pending an appeal. All of this is legal jargon just to say that they're not weighing in on the merits. This is not the Supreme Court saying that Texas was right to put this law into effect and that the federal government doesn't have a case here. They haven't heard the merits yet. They're just putting the stay in place for now.
To be clear, though, the practical impact of that is that it allows the law to move forward, right? It allows the law to go into effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It can go into effect. Texas can start authorizing their police to arrest anyone they suspect to be a migrant now. And that's a big deal in a state that is 40% Latino, Hallie.
So let's talk about the ripple effect here, because we got into this with David Noriega just about 24 hours ago when we were covering that breaking news. The Texas AG, you heard it, framing it as a win, saying that this law gives Texas the ability to defend itself from things like cartels, fentanyl coming across the border, things that he says are flooding his state. But the domino impact for other states, even if they're not border states, potentially, right, they could do something similar, giving themselves more power that the federal government might typically have.
Yeah, exactly. You can see a lot of states follow suit and particularly lead to the arrest of migrants who've been living in the country for a long time. And even those who are documented, legally allowed to be here, might be questioned more so than they usually would have. That's why the Biden administration, the White House today, and a lot of these groups say that this is going to sow chaos and confusion. And it could be nationally if other states follow suit.
You also have some reporting, speaking of Texas, on somebody who claimed to be a bomb maker for Hezbollah when agents stopped him at the border near El Paso. We know the Biden administration has been leaning on Mexico more and more to help stop the number of people coming across the border. Talk about that pressure and how it's been building here, Julia.
Yeah, and that man claimed to be part of Hezbollah, said he wanted to make a bomb, which sources I've talked to said it's highly unusual someone would volunteer that information. But it really underscores this point, Hallie, and that the U.S. oftentimes doesn't get enough information from law enforcement in other countries that we don't have great relationships with. That might include Lebanon. It certainly includes Venezuela, where we see a large number of migrants coming in now. How do we know that the people who are crossing the border don't have criminal records? We do have a terrorism watch list for people who might be known or suspected to the U.S. based on FBI data. We also have Interpol. But I've been talking to some officials who say, look, this has been a real problem, particularly as more countries won't share this information. Mexico might be sharing more. They're more cooperative. But other countries need to start supplying more information.
Julia Ainsley live for us with all of those late-breaking developments. Thank you very much. We've also got some developments out of Mississippi tonight and a sentence for one of 6 ex-officers, part of a self-proclaimed Goon Squad, for his role in a racist attack on 2 black men. We're talking about Hunter Elwood. You see him here, set to serve about 20 years in federal prison. This is new just into us. He's the first one to be sentenced out of these 6 deputies who pleaded guilty to involvement in a horrific attack last January. That's when prosecutors say these officers burst into the home of these 2 men without a warrant and assaulted them using stun guns, a sex toy, pouring milk and alcohol on their faces, forcing them to strip naked. The ex-officer sentenced today even admitted to what's been called a mock execution that went wrong when he shot one of them in the mouth. This group then came up with a cover-up, planting drugs and a gun. One of the victims saying tonight, while he doesn't forgive them, he feels a little safer now.
If you wouldn't have got caught, you'd still be doing the same thing. I feel somewhat safe. Like sun coming out. This scar never go away.
That scar will never go away. He says, I want to bring in Antonia Hilton for more on this, not just physical scars, but obviously traumatic emotional ones, too, after what happened. Talk to us about what we're hearing from the community with this development today.
Well, Hallie, I was actually just speaking with one black community organizer, a mom and voter in the area who was outraged and disgusted by all of this. To many people in Mississippi, this case really represents a relic of what they had hoped was a bygone era. And look, this is something that people are who don't even know these men. They are feeling mentally and emotionally impacted by. And it sent these shockwaves through because, you know, the Goon Squad is involved in many other cases. The local DA now, as a result of everything that you just laid out there, is going to have to go through all the cases that these 6 men have been involved in and attached to and potentially unravel them. That could, of course, lead to more people getting their day in court or their freedom. But that is going to cause immense pain, new revelations certainly to come in the next few months, maybe even years, as all of this is processed by the community in the Rankin County and Jackson area. Take a listen to one of the victim's supporters today talking about what all of this means.
Their fight, their bravery, their courage is the only reason we're standing here today, and it's justice for all black people. Hopefully a new trend of where black people in Mississippi and all over our country, when we're brutalized by police, we receive justice just like everyone else.
You know, Hallie, even in spite of the anger people feel, one of the victims stood up in court today and actually said to Elwood that I forgive you.
Which is just such a powerful sentiment here. When you look at the rest of the so-called Goon Squad, Antonia, what's next for them?
Well, they are going to be sentenced. All 6 of them have pled guilty to these charges. These are incredibly serious federal charges. So looking at 20 years for Elwood and something similar to that, very likely for the rest of these men in the coming days, Hallie. And that is what the community wants, maximum time behind bars.
Yeah. Antonia Hilton, thank you very much for your coverage of this one. So right now, polls are getting ready to close all across the country in a bunch of races that are less pointless than they seem. And I know, I can hear what you're thinking. Well, wait a second, Hallie. Why do I care about these 5 states, right? Like, given that President Biden and former President Trump have already clinched their party's nominations, why should I care? Let me tell you why, especially if you don't live in one of those states. First, this sets up a critical Senate race for both parties, something that could determine the Senate's balance of power come 2025. That's this Ohio race. Second, this is going to be the first real test of the power and clout of an endorsement from former President Trump this cycle. And third, tonight really marks the first opportunity to take people's temperatures now that this rematch has been set up ahead of November. We've got primaries not just in Ohio, but in Mr. Trump's home state of Florida as well. You're about to see him after voting, I should say, with the races coming after some controversy sparked by comments he's made over the course of the last 72 hours or so. Like one about his plan to possibly deport Prince Harry from the United States if he's elected again, based on Harry's past drug use that he's talked about. But I want to start with NBC's Jesse Kirsch, who is in Columbus for us tonight. So we've laid out, right, why these races matter. Clearly, for people where you are, it's their state. But for folks in the other 49, there's maybe a lesson here about the power of a Donald Trump endorsement in 2024, right?
Yeah, and Hallie, if that sounds like deja vu for our viewers, that's because we had the same conversation about an Ohio Senate primary back in 2022. That time, we found out that, in fact, Donald Trump's endorsement held a lot of weight. And so the question tonight is this truly fully the MAGA party, or is there still an establishment, more traditional, what we think of Republican wing, that can still have a strong footing? Because we have a candidate, Bernie Moreno, who has been endorsed by the former president, and opposite him is a state senator, Matt Dolan, who's been endorsed by the governor of Ohio. Now, Dolan has even said that his policies, he thinks, line up with the former president, but he's trying to draw a distinction with himself on the rhetoric front. And at the same time, the former president's chosen candidate, Bernie Moreno, is saying, do we want the party of Trump, or do we want the party of people like Liz Cheney, like Mitt Romney? So they are drawing those contrasts, and we're going to find out based on the vote if voters have gone one way or the other. Here's what we've heard from some. We're going to start with someone we spoke with at a Bernie Moreno event yesterday.
I think he's the best for the country to sustain our freedom and our rights and to close the border.
I would not vote for Bernie Moreno.
And why is that?
Because Trump backs him. I can't back any candidate that Trump backs, period.
So those are some of the views we're hearing from voters. And I want to show you, Hallie, just an idea of the kinds of people, the number of people who have thrown their endorsements into this race. And you can see this long list of people backing Bernie Moreno. Just speaks to not just the type of endorsement, but the sheer number of endorsements that he's got behind him right now.
Jesse Kirsch, it's a fascinating one, right? You're the tip of the spear there on sort of the Trump factor versus the old guard factor there in Ohio. We'll be checking back in with you, I know, as the polls get closer to closing where you are. Vaughn, let me go to you now, because former President Trump has made a lot of comments that have created a lot of controversy in the many years that he's been in the public eye, but especially in the last 72 hours or so. There was that bloodbath comment that he says related to his discussion of the auto industry. We played that for folks yesterday. Now there's what he's saying about Jewish people voting for Democrats. And that is getting pushback from the second gentleman, right? The first Jewish person to be married to a president or a vice president, as he has said here. Talk us through that.
Right, and it's important context also that this is the first time that not the first time that Donald Trump has delivered similar remarks. Yeah. He had suggested even from the Oval Office in 2019 that Jewish people who vote Democrat are disloyal. You know, I want to let you just look at a statement from the Trump campaign spokesperson here today, doubling down on Trump's comments over the last 24 hours, writing in part, quote, President Trump is right. The Democrat Party has turned into a full-blown anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, pro-terrorist cabal. Of course, Donald Trump here in the last months also suggested if he does not win the presidency here in the United States of America in November, that will be an end to Israel. You mentioned Doug Emhoff, the first gentleman. I want to let you listen to him directly respond to the former president's remarks.
This is a disgusting, toxic, anti-Semitic thing to say by anyone, let alone a former president of the United States, and it must be condemned.
That was the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, responding directly to the former president of the United States and Republican nominee for president in 2024, Hallie.
There's also, Vaughn, where you are in Arizona, President Biden on the ballot where you are, right? Can we talk us through some of the tea leaves? You know, we love to read a tea leaf here at the show. What kind of tea leaves can we read from however this vote goes in Arizona, which is a really important state? Obviously, it's one of the critical ones that we're watching come November.
Right. I mean, look at 2020, Hallie. Donald Trump lost Arizona by just over 11,000 votes here. And so when you're having a talk about conservatives who are reticent to Donald Trump or independents who voted for Joe Biden over him in 2020, Donald Trump has to win back some of those voters. And frankly, it's comments like those. I was talking to a gentleman named Tom Winters here. He's a longtime registered Republican. He tells me he voted for John McCain over Barack Obama in 2008. He said that he would vote for Nikki Haley over Joe Biden if she were the Republican nominee in November. But that's not the case. And he came today in a protest vote, voting for Nikki Haley on this Republican primary ballot, despite Donald Trump being having already hit the delegate threshold. I want to let you just listen to part of what Tom Winters had to tell me here. Take a listen.
I'm one of those election deniers, evidently.
If the results come in and it says Donald Trump and Kari Lake didn't win, will you trust those results?
No.
I guess it's called Morano.
This November, will you vote for Biden or Trump then?
Biden.
And you see, when you pair up Tom Winters with that first woman that we talked to, who said that she was a self-described election denier, believes that Kari Lake won her governor's race here in 2022, and Donald Trump actually won the state of Arizona in 2020. The Trump campaign is relying on energizing voters like her in mass, even folks that hadn't voted in 2020, to make up for some of those independents or even conservatives that don't swing their votes back over. Folks like Tom Winters, who said that despite being a registered Republican, he'll vote Democrat. So that's where this race is going to be complicated. Right. It's going to be a matter of turnout. These next 7 months are going to be intense across the country, but particularly in places like here in Arizona, Hallie.
7 months feels far away, but also it's going to go by like that. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much. Glad to have you there. Appreciate it. So listen, stop me if you've heard this one before. Clock's ticking tonight for Congress to race for the 6th time this year to avoid a government shutdown before this deadline, midnight Friday. It's not you, my friends. You're not having deja vu. But in this instance, things are actually looking up. President Biden and congressional leaders announcing earlier today a deal to lock in funding for the rest of the fiscal year. Well, that ends in September, but hey, there's some time. The latest this latest plan has to do with some really important stuff. We're talking the State Department, the Department of Defense, Labor, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, and that last one, Homeland Security, apparently the thorn in negotiator sides, taking days longer to get to an agreement on that before today's announcement that a deal was in place. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is following this one for us. Okay, here we go again, right? It looks like we're going to avoid a government shutdown before this Friday night deadline, but there's a couple of steps that have to happen before that's officially official, right?
Yeah, it's still possible that Congress stumbles into a shutdown inadvertently, Hallie, because first what needs to happen is they need to release text of this bill. They don't have a bill yet. They have a deal. And after that happens, Speaker Johnson has indicated that he's going to give members 72 hours before they hold a vote in the House of Representatives. If you just look at the clock, that means they have to release it tonight just to get out of the House in time by the Friday midnight deadline. And then it goes over to the Senate, where you can't do anything quickly unless you get unanimous consent. That has happened in previous times. They've gotten that time agreement just in time to prevent a shutdown. Like last time, it was just a few hours. But they also released bill text earlier. So the possibility of a brief shutdown is still not negated at this moment. Let's take a look at what the impacts would be in the event that that does happen. At the IRS, about 50+% of employees would be furloughed. During the height of tax season, this is when most Americans are racing to file their taxes, and the DoD active duty service members would be working without pay. They would get back pay, but no one wants that to happen either. TSA employees would be working without pay during spring break travel, and in the Department of Education, about 89% of employees would be furloughed. Now, all of that, of course, would be minimized if it's just a brief weekend shutdown. The real harsh effects don't go into effect until Monday, and the allure of a 2-week recess, which is what the Senate is looking at, has the tendency in the past, Hallie, of motivating senators to consent to a time agreement here. So that's really the best thing Congress has going for it at the moment.
There's an interesting piece of this, because the reason they didn't get to this point even earlier seems to stem from negotiations over funding the Department of Homeland Security, in particular, Democrats who wanted more border security, more enforcement money. That sounds like things that would be at the top of the GOP agenda, right? So why was this controversial?
Well, immigration politics have gotten very weird on Capitol Hill, Hallie. It started with the Biden administration, coming in, rolling back a bunch of Trump's policies. Then things did not get any better. The situation with migrants got pretty overwhelming for them at the border. And more recently, in the last few months, President Biden's approval rating went way, way, way down on the issue of immigration. And he decided he wanted to change course. And he said, OK, Republicans, let's tighten immigration laws. Let's raise the standard for asylum. Republicans said, we're not doing any of that unless you give us pretty much everything we want. That was literally what what former President Trump said. It has to be perfect or there is no deal. So right now, they're working within this small space of funding here, a little bit of funding there. Republicans want DHS to reprioritize toward its core mission. That's according to a source I spoke to. They don't like the way Secretary Mayorkas is using his discretion. And the White House is demanding more money for border agents, for law enforcement on immigration, because they realize that has to happen, Hallie.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. To Tennessee, because we're learning more tonight about the search for a missing college student who disappeared 10 days ago after leaving a bar on a frat trip to Nashville. With Riley Strain's father tonight saying this.
We're still here, bub. We're looking for you. We want to take you home for graduation.
An emotional message to his son there. After this really short interaction was caught on police body cam footage. We told you about it last night between Riley Strain and Nashville police. Watch.
How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
A police department spokesperson says as of now, there are no signs of foul play. Kathy Park is joining us now. And Kathy, there was some talk about a text message that Strain allegedly sent. What's the latest on that? Where do things stand with the investigation and with his family's desperate search now?
Yeah, Hallie. So in regards to that text message, Chris Dingman is a close family friend. I had a chance to speak with him earlier this afternoon, and he apparently got wind of this last text exchange from Riley and a girl that he was dating. And apparently he wrote her back saying good lops because the girl asked him how he was doing that night. And good lops, it wasn't very clear exactly what he meant by that. And Chris, the friend, the close family friend, was saying, listen, Riley is, he's very articulate, so it's a little bizarre. So he thought it was cryptic. However, earlier today, I spoke with family members. His stepfather asked him exactly, could he elaborate on this text message? And he couldn't. He said, look, Riley had a lot of communication with several people that evening, and he doesn't necessarily want to muddy the investigation. Take a listen.
We know that Riley was possibly texting and communicating with multiple people. Again, we don't know the exact people. We don't know the exact timeline, or who the last person was.
And Hallie, we learned at this press conference that the search efforts will be ramping up thanks to volunteers. We heard from the United Cajun Navy members will be here this week. They're planning on bringing 2 boats to kind of comb through the Cumberland River. I'm staring at the Cumberland River right now. Broadway is right behind me. Luke Bryan's bar, that was the last location where Riley was seen before he left us before 10 p.m. on March 8th. That was his last stop, and you probably have seen the surveillance footage over the last couple of days. You have seen him stumbling, falling at times, and then there is that body camera footage that was released by Nashville PD where he has that brief interaction with an officer, and he doesn't appear distressed during that interaction. And you're taking a look at the map of kind of where his whereabouts, his last movements were the night of March 8th, and it's all kind of within a 1-mile radius. But officials did tell us that most of their search efforts will be centered near the riverbank, near the embankment, right by the Cumberland River, because that is the last location where Riley was seen. Hallie?
Kathy Park, thank you very much. Live for us there in Nashville. An NBC News exclusive tonight with the head of the FAA warning about the safety culture at Boeing in a one-on-one with our own Lester Holt. Watch.
You recently paid a visit to Boeing. We were able to see some of their manufacturing process. What were some of your impressions?
Well, my impressions were similar to the culture survey that just got completed at Boeing and our audit, which is that there are issues around the safety culture at Boeing, that their priorities have been on production and not on safety and quality. And so what we really are focused on now is shifting that focus from production to safety and quality.
Now, that audit he's referring to, of course, is the FAA's investigation into Boeing's production, where it found dozens of problems. NBC News asked Boeing for a response to those remarks, but we haven't heard back. In a recent statement, though, Boeing did say they continue to implement, you see it here, immediate changes and develop a comprehensive action plan to strengthen safety and quality. This whole thing, right, this year really started with one of the crazy moments you're seeing right here, when a door plug blew off mid-flight earlier this year. Since then, it's been problem after problem, right? This United plane landing without a panel in Oregon, a big midair drop or some kind of a shake during a LATAM Airlines flight to New Zealand. 50 people hurt there. Most recently, an Alaska Airlines plane's windshield got a little crack in it while landing in Portland from Reagan National. Now, all of those things happen on Boeing planes, but we got to point out here, doesn't necessarily mean that that is Boeing's fault. Let's get into it a little bit more with CNBC's Phil LeBeau. Let me play a bit more of that interview between Lester and the FAA administrator.
What were certain protocols? Those were not being met in terms of how they approached production of the airplanes?
Not what you would have expected if safety is the first priority. Whenever someone comes into the FAA to brief on their company, the first thing I expect is to talk about safety, because we all have to start there. If it's not safe, then the whole system is not working the way it should.
So given all this, Phil, how does Boeing move forward from this?
Well, two things. One, they're putting together a plan for updating the safety culture as well as quality controls. They will present that to the FAA and regulators within the next 90 days. And then the FAA will talk with them about, what are you doing? Are you making all of the moves that need to be made? And in the meantime, Hallie, there are more FAA inspectors on the ground at the plant in Renton, Washington, where the 737 MAX is built. So they have more scrutiny than ever before to make sure that Boeing is doing the right things. Those are two things near term that Boeing needs to do in order to ensure that it is meeting the requirements that you would expect for an aircraft coming out of that plant.
There's also the piece of this. I mean, we have to think back, obviously, the crashes 5 years ago. That was really, I think, the start of some of these problems with Boeing. But this other point, right, that some of these issues perhaps are more happening at the hands of the airlines than at Boeing itself, right? Can you explain that?
Correct. Remember about a week and a half ago, there was the video of the plane taking off and a wheel fell off of it? That plane was 20 years old. That has nothing to do with the manufacturing at Boeing. And some of these other instances are with older aircraft that have been in airline fleets for a number of years. Doesn't diminish the significance or the fact that they are a little scary when you see those incidents, but it also is not necessarily a Boeing issue, more of an airline maintenance issue.
Phil LeBeau, we're glad to have you. Thank you very much. And, of course, you can watch more of Lester's exclusive interview there tonight on Nightly News, 6:30 Eastern, wherever you watch your local NBC station. A lot more to get to when we come back, including the group that organizes the Olympics cracking down really hard on Russia and its athletes. Big news on the opening ceremony this summer coming up. Plus, when you think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do you also think of Elon Musk or Sylvester Stallone? The late justice's family says no. Why that means a whole gala is now scrapped. Why Richard Simmons had to come out and say he's actually not dying. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. But first, anger from Russian athletes tonight, responding to the IOC decision today to not let athletes from Russia and Belarus, an ally, participate in the opening ceremony at the Paris Olympics. These athletes are calling it unacceptable. They say IOC leaders are crazy, their words. The announcement is happening as the International Olympics Committee is also sending out a warning to countries around the world about Russia's cynical attempt, in their words, to bring politics into sport. At issue here, the so-called Friendship Games that Russia's holding that are set to launch just weeks after the Summer Games in Paris. The IOC wants other governments to not participate or support the event, saying athletes are being exploited by a propaganda campaign. We know Russia has become more and more isolated from international sports, frozen out of some of these international competitions after it invaded Ukraine. Plus, complicating that relationship, Russia's track record with breaking anti-doping rules. Maura Barrett is joining us now. It seems like it's under the sports washing umbrella. Explain that.
Yeah, Hallie, Russia is saying that these friendship games will ensure free access for Russian athletes to compete internationally. But the reality of it, when you look really closely, is the definition of sports washing to a T. And essentially, that's when a country embroiled in controversy, like Russia, is using athletics or the camaraderie that comes with sports to try to protect their reputation. And that's specifically around the issue with the war against Ukraine, especially because the Olympic Committee is not allowing any athletes, whether you're from Russia or their ally Belarus or anywhere else that supports the war in Ukraine, they're saying that you cannot compete. And so that's the issue at question here. And we've seen many recent instances of sports washing. Let's take a look at this. In 2022 in Qatar with the FIFA World Cup, amid allegations of corruption, using migrant labor to build the stadiums, along with overall concerns about how the country treats women. There was also the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. That came along with criticisms of President Xi's assault on human rights. And the Live Golf League league all across the board. It was created and fully funded by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so a bunch of countries embroiled in that controversy using sports to try to boost its reputation and say, hey, like, we're doing what all of the rest of you are doing. But obviously there's that veil of controversy around it. Now, Russia coming out today, reacting to it, kind of laughing it off, but also pushing back, saying basically that the Olympic Committee is Russophobic. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said that it evokes rudeness and an indicator of the hopelessness to which the IOC has doomed itself by succumbing to Russophobia. So obviously pushback from Russia, as we might have expected, Hallie.
Yeah, there's also this whole thing that they're not going to get to be part of the opening ceremony, which is also somewhat significant here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that has kind of been percolating for a while, but basically the rules have changed for how Russian athletes or Belarusian athletes can compete. Because back in 2022, after that anti-doping scandal, there was an option for athletes to compete under the Russian Olympic Committee. Now that's not the case. The Paris Olympics are setting out new rules saying that any athletes from one of those two countries can actually, they're not going to compete under those countries, but they're going to compete on their own team, basically an neutral individual athlete team. We have a photo of the flag that they'll be competing under. It's very basic, and the committee is putting forth very strict rules to be able to compete underneath that moniker. Basically, teams of athletes from Russia or Belarus are not going to be allowed to participate, and athletes, like I said, who actively support the war against Ukraine will not be eligible, along with athletes contracted to Russian or Belarusian national security agencies or military. They can't compete, and also they will be consistently held accountable to those anti-doping regulations. So the committee expects about 50 athletes to qualify under this team, but that's still under review. Hallie.
Maura Barra, thank you very much. New research tonight is laying out the consequences of one of the pandemic's biggest decisions, shutting down schools. Remember, it was only 4 years ago. Really, 4 years ago this month, that kids all across the country, K-12, college too, went online only to learn. The thought that it would keep students safe without decreasing the education they got, the quality of that education. But some of the numbers we see now show that's not how it worked out. Here's our breakdown.
Officials from red states.
The state will have an extended spring break.
To blue.
Something I could not in a million years have imagined having to do.
All making the same hard choice, shutting down schools to stop the spread of, at the time, an unknown and deadly virus.
3,000 deaths already nationwide.
The science behind the consequences, not exactly certain.
But I don't have a good explanation or solution to the problem of what happens when you close schools and it triggers a cascade of events.
New research finding what does happen. The shutdowns coming at a steep cost to students.
What we're seeing is that the pandemic is really acting as a compounding debt. It's keeping kids from being able to progress as they enter new levels within the education system at the typical rates we would expect.
Start with the learning loss. A study led by researchers at Harvard and Stanford found school districts that spent most of the 2020 to 2021 school year remote saw students fall more than half a grade behind in math on average, more than districts that spent most of the year in person. Lower income students ended up hurt the most, whether they went back to school sooner or stayed mostly at home that year. Politics also playing a role. Republican-led states reopening faster than those run by Democrats. Some of those red state governors, like Florida's Ron DeSantis, arguing his way worked.
We in Florida dragged the country out of lockdown.
Some Democrats and teachers unions standing by their approach.
We knew we had to be in school. We just wanted to be safe.
Question is, did closures slow COVID down? Data we now have shows people under 20 were half as likely to catch COVID, but not necessarily less likely to spread it. And experts we spoke with say the impact on stopping the spread depends on the school.
By the summer of 2020, we did have some data primarily from Europe showing that kids could be safely in school. But again, circumstances. Some schools were able to do that. Other schools just simply could not do it.
But the academic damage is done. And even now, national test scores from spring 2023 show students 3rd through 8th grade overall have not rebounded from what they lost in math. Experts say districts need to boost funding for tutoring or summer school to get those numbers back up.
The problem that we're seeing is that the dosage of the treatment does not match the scale of the crisis. Without those interventions, I think we will have no hope of getting kids out of this hole.
While the next major health crisis will probably have a whole new set of challenges, some argue there are valuable lessons learned.
We can't take the lessons specifically from COVID and say, what we learned there is exactly going to apply. But what we can do is build resiliency in our school system so that they are able to withstand this potential needing to stay open.
Dr. O'Leary, who you heard there, says if there's any one thing schools need to put money behind now, it's ventilation, keeping that up to date to build up resilience in schools for the next crisis. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, former Trump advisor Peter Navarro reporting to prison in Miami today to start his 4-month sentence. Remember, he was convicted of contempt of Congress last year for refusing to cooperate with the subpoena from the January 6th committee. That was just hours after the Supreme Court rejected Navarro's request to put the sentence on hold while he appeals. Number 2, the former Brazilian president indicted today for allegedly falsifying COVID vaccination data. The indictment claims Jair Bolsonaro and more than a dozen others put fake information into a public health database to cheat health restrictions. Brazil's Prosecutor General's office is going to have the final say on whether to press charges. Bolsonaro's lawyer calls the indictment absurd. Number 3, the CDC warning doctors about more measles cases across the country. Nearly 60 confirmed cases so far this year. That's as many as we had in all of last year, and it's only March. The agency says most of the cases this year are linked to international travel and to young kids who have not been vaccinated yet. Number 4, foundation canceling the ceremony for an award named after Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Why? Because of some controversial choices on who to honor. Elon Musk, Rupert Murdoch, Sylvester Stallone, set to be recipients or honored at a gala in D.C. Ginsburg's family calls that an affront to her memory, saying the organization strayed too far from what the late justice stood for. The organizers say they're not interested in creating controversy. Number 5, Richard Simmons having to clarify that he is not, in fact, dying, with speculation starting about 24 hours ago when he posted on X saying, "I am dying." He followed up with, "We are all dying," and with another post encouraging people to live life to the fullest. So like an inspirational thing. Every day in life, we are getting closer to our death. Technically that's true. But for Richard Simmons, it is not apparently imminently true. The more you know. When we come back, why a company that's been selling ice cream for more than a century is now getting out of that business entirely, and the big layoffs coming with it. Plus, the Stumpy sensation taking over cherry blossom season. The relatable little tree not quite thriving, but surviving. So why is it going to get the axe? NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Midwest bureau, a car dealer in Kansas getting indicted for rolling back car odometers. Prosecutors say he basically altered the mileage on a bunch of cars, making them look newer than they were so he could sell them, obviously at a higher price. Experts say odometer fraud costs car buyers more than $1 billion every year. Out of our Northeast bureau, Dartmouth is refusing to bargain with its men's basketball team. Remember, we've covered it extensively here on this show. The team voted earlier this month to form the first ever union in college sports. The school says it believes athletes in the Ivy League are not employees, and that if the National Labor Relations Board doesn't overturn this, they're going to ask a federal court to review the decision. And out of our Southern bureau, a dog rescue in Florida is getting dozens of golden retrievers ready for adoption after rescuing them from a breeder in Virginia. Officials say the original breeder was totally overwhelmed, handling about 80 dogs, some of them forced to stay outside even in the snow. Now they are, look at them, in the golden sun of Florida, those Goldens out there waiting to be adopted at this big dog ranch rescue. Good for them. So listen, this huge company, Unilever, that sells a lot of the stuff that we buy, says it's kind of getting out of the ice cream business. One big reason, inflation. You'll still be able to buy your Ben & Jerry's, your Magnums. They make those chocolate-covered ice cream bars, the Klondike bars. But Unilever is spinning them off into a different company since it says people are cutting back on ice cream due to higher prices, specifically inflation. It's part of a big move by Unilever to cut costs as it lays off 7,500 workers. Brian Chung is joining us now. The markets seem to like this, right? And that's what we've generally seen when you look at what companies do with layoffs, right? At the same time, there's a really interesting inflationary impact here, too. Talk us through it.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, this is not unprecedented. We saw this with Kraft Heinz when they spun off their snack business in the form of Mondelez. But yeah, the news today is that Unilever plans on spinning off its ice cream businesses, which includes the Ben & Jerry's brand. It includes Magnum as well. And, you know, one reason for this is because they say that it's just not one of their more profitable businesses. So Bloomberg crunched the numbers, and the profit margins on the ice cream business is substantially smaller than the other things that it sells. So again, those profits less than half what it makes compared to the personal care products which they sell. And again, Unilever is a huge conglomerate. So let's take a look at some of the other types of products that they do sell. We're thinking of soaps. We're thinking of skincare products, right? These are, in some cases, deodorant, right? So these are very familiar brands to people, but you'll notice not a lot of these are foods. And it's not that they're worried about getting, you know, vanilla ice cream in the soaps themselves, but they are saying, well, by divesting these brands, we can focus a little bit more on the things that don't require large fridges to deliver from one side of the world to the other. So they say this would simplify their business. And again, there's always money usually involved in these types of things as well. So they see it as maybe a way to increase profits going forward, Hallie.
You also talk about Ben & Jerry's, Brian. It's interesting because that's been kind of a political brand. It decided not to sell in Israeli-occupied territories. It called for the return of what it called stolen indigenous land. It's not, Ben & Jerry's has been political. They've been, you know, not uncomfortable doing that. How much does that factor into a bigger parent company like Unilever when they make their decisions on brands?
Well, the Unilever announcement on this didn't mention any of that. But to your point, there have been instances in the past where there have been legal hiccups where you actually had some of the subsidiary companies like Ben & Jerry's lobbying lawsuits at the parent company, Unilever, over some of the things that you mentioned. What happened in Israel is one example where the subsidiary of Ben & Jerry's that was in Israel was protesting the way that Unilever was trying to essentially force them into selling their products in what Israel claimed to be their occupied territories, like in the West Bank. Ben & Jerry's didn't want to do so. There were legal holdups that were resulted as of that action. So again, these are things that happened in the past. They happened in 2022. Unilever's not citing that in the announcement today, but of course you do wonder whether or not that was perhaps some of the reason behind the decision to ultimately announce today that they want to spin off the ice cream brand, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you very much for that. Coming up, why more people are turning to medication abortion now. What we're learning from these new numbers ahead of arguments in a high-stakes Supreme Court case on how people can actually access an abortion pill. That's next. We're learning today that medication abortions in this country have gone up in the time since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. This is according to some new data from the Guttmacher Institute. That's a research group that supports abortion access. The report finds last year there were more than 150,000 more medication abortions than in 2020. These kinds of abortions have been on the rise for a long time, for decades, really. You see the numbers there. They make up something like 60% of all abortions in this country, up from 10% just about in 2001. This comes as the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments next week in a case that could decide whether one of the most commonly used abortion pills, mifepristone, could stay easily accessible. Berkeley Loveless is on this. He's with me now. Talk us through some of these new numbers now on medication abortion. What are they telling us?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So there were sharp increases in states bordering states with complete abortion. So there's at least 14 states with complete abortion bans. There's a handful of other states with restrictions on abortions. And the sharpest increases were seen in places like New Mexico, which borders Texas, and then Illinois, which borders Missouri. And they were seen to have the most increases. So that means people are traveling out of state to get abortion care.
And so we laid out that map of sort of where this is happening. How do the Supreme Court arguments next week play into this issue of access to medication abortion?
Yeah, so doctors and patients are really concerned about this. So they say there's going to be huge ramifications if the Supreme Court does decide to limit access for this drug. So Dr. I spoke with said most of his patients prefer medication abortion. It provides a level of privacy, and it's also especially great for people with disabilities who may not be able to travel to get their medication. And so sometimes this is the only option that they have for the drug as well. There's also concerns if they limit access, this could also push people into a black market, and there's some safety concerns about that. And then there's also concerns about the FDA's authority to regulate drugs. So the FDA has said since 2000 that this drug is safe and effective, and this could, if the Supreme Court decides this way, hurt the FDA's authority to approve drugs in the future. But this is all just oral arguments next week. This is not a decision from the Supreme Court, so we're just going to hear from the two sides.
It'll be arguments next week, and then maybe a decision, we think, at the end of the term, towards the end of the term, roughly.
Yeah,
we don't know for sure. But
we don't know for sure.
Yeah, okay. Berkeley Levis, obviously a lot of implications on that, a lot of threads to pull together. Thank you for your reporting on this. Still to come here on the show, new questions about an old picture of the royals. What our photo editor is finding in a portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth. More drama here coming up. It is peak bloom here in Washington. That means that the cherry blossoms around the Tidal Basin and elsewhere are absolutely spectacular, and everybody's showing up to see him. But the biggest star? Stumpy, a social media sensation, a mascot, actually. We're about to show him to you. There he is. There it is. Pretty decrepit, a little crooked, but then again, this is Washington. But inspirational. A reminder, you don't have to be classically beautiful to be beloved, and Stumpy sure is. Tons of people coming out to take their Stumpy selfies now. He looks like this. This tree looks like this because the National Park Service says rising sea levels are sending salty water flooding the shores of the Tidal Basin. You see how close Stumpy is to the water there? That's not good for cherry trees. It's already killed a lot of the trees right around Stumpy. So to fix the seawall, to rebuild it, the National Park Service says it has to cut down 140 of the roughly 1,700 cherry trees that ring the basin there. And yes, Stumpy is on the chopping block. That's a blow to some of the folks showing up to say their final goodbyes to this little tree. I was out there today chatting with some of them. Listen. What do you think?
It's so beautiful. We were just talking about how inspirational it was.
Why?
She's dead on the inside and alive on the outside.
What do you think of Stumpy?
He's Stumpy. It's so sad it's going, but I understand why. But it's still sad.
It's famous.
It's Stumpy. Those people, by the way, came in from Western PA just to see Stumpy. I met somebody who drove up from Richmond just to feast their eyes on this short king. R.I.P. Stumpy. Not gone yet, but you're running out of time to see him. Here's the good news, though. Cuttings from Stumpy will be used by arborists to create genetic clones, essentially, and then replanted, so eventually new cherry trees will grow. If you can't tell, I'm on the Stumpy beat today. You'll see more of that tonight on NBC Nightly News, wherever you get your local NBC station. All right, let's talk about what's happening overseas, because Getty is issuing yet another editor's note on yet another photo of the royal family for what it calls digital enhancements. And one of our NBC News photo editors ran an analysis on the picture you're about to see right here, right? This is the late Queen with her great-grandchildren, a picture taken by Kate Middleton, released last year. And there were some Photoshop issues, right? Some Photoshop fails, circling them in red. You can see them right here, where the patterns of the clothing and the furniture just don't seem to match up. There are some other possible problems, too. A chunk of one of the grandkids' cheek that seems to be cut out, and this sort of strange dark area behind the neck of this other great-grandkid here. Remember, it's just about a week ago, the Kensington Palace posted a different picture of Kate Middleton and her kids that big news organizations had to take down because they said it was manipulated. Matt Bradley is following it from London and joins us now. Matt, if I was on the Stumpy beat, you were on the Royals beat big time, right? And this is just yet another development here about the way that, and I think looking at the picture, the way that the palace tries to present itself and present the royals, they can't always control what the message is, especially at a moment like this when there's all these conspiracies, all these controversies around Kate Middleton, questions about these photos, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that what we're finding here is exactly what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks here, Hallie. I mean, they tried to weigh in, they tried to control the message, but they're trying to do it in a way, interestingly, that's kind of like the old palace, the old system. You know, they manage the media very, very effectively. If you've ever covered the royals, it's all very tightly choreographed. Everybody has their place. Everything is with badges and, you know, everything is done very, very well, very professionally. They might have thought that they could manage this situation, and this situation is unmanageable, and it's just showing because they've pulled this thread, and now social media is still pulling the same thread and coming up with more and more goods over and over again. So this is something that, you know, it just goes to show their growing pains. You know, they were dealing with traditional media. They could call up the editor of the Daily Mail or the Sun and talk to them and explain things to them, threaten them with lawsuits, which they've done very many times. You can't call up social media. There's no one to call. They thought that in a way. It looked like they were trying to do that, and they failed.
Prince William, file this under the keep calm and carry on mantra, I guess, because Prince William is going forward with his royal duties just a few hours ago, showing up at an event. He didn't talk about sort of everything that's happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that he can say. And, I think this is kind of part of what we're talking about here. It looks as though maybe the palace has decided that maybe they should just kind of let this ride until Easter, which was the date that they gave back in January, saying that they weren't going to give updates on Kate Middleton. She would be returning to work after Easter. I think maybe they have decided that they shouldn't throw more good money after bad, that they should maybe not say anything for the time being, let Easter come and go, let Kate Middleton decide whether or not she's going to make a public appearance to her many, many adoring fans who really want to see her, and just let it ride, because at this point, trying to manage a social media situation just hasn't been working out for them, and this latest revelation, more evidence of that.
Matt Bradley, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. We're coming on the air with a dramatic ruling that could reshape the border crisis as the Supreme Court greenlights a Texas law to let local police arrest migrants. That's a big change from how it is now, with only the feds having that authority. The latest front in Texas's battle with the Biden administration and whether other states could do the same coming up. Plus, a racist ex-police officer, part of the so-called Goon Squad, learning he'll spend the next 2 decades in federal prison for framing and torturing 2 black men in Mississippi in a racist attack. What the victim's lawyers say is next in their fight for justice. Then, just in the last hour, we're hearing from former President Trump defending comments he made about Jewish voters that the second gentleman says are anti-Semitic. We're live in Arizona and Ohio on the campaign trail. Also new tonight, an NBC News exclusive. Our Lester Holt one-on-one with the head of the FAA after that string of problems with Boeing planes. Why he says there are issues with the company's safety culture. And in the breakdown, the new research laying out the consequences of school shutdowns during the pandemic. Experts say hindsight's 2020. We'll explain a little later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we're coming on the air with a big deal decision by the Supreme Court, letting a Texas immigration law go into effect, at least temporarily, that now gives the state more power than we've ever seen. Specifically, it gives local police in Texas the ability to arrest anybody illegally crossing the border. Up until now, only the feds had that power. Right now, the Texas Department of Public Safety says they don't yet have a start date for when that law will go into effect, but we're already seeing some of the fallout, with the White House saying they fundamentally disagree with the decision on a law they say, in their words, is just another example of Republicans politicizing the border. The reason this is such a big deal, it has a big impact on 2 fronts here. The first, Texas, specifically, what we could see play out there, with experts telling us there's a ton of uncertainty around how this plays out. It's unprecedented. We haven't seen this before on the state level. Migrant rights groups are now calling it the most extreme anti-immigrant law ever passed. They're worried this could lead to a lot of racial profiling, since local police can now question and investigate people suspected of having entered the U.S. illegally. Then there's bucket number 2. That's the national impact beyond Texas, and it goes beyond immigration. Could other states pass laws to give them power that the federal government typically only has? Now, the court split on this decision right along ideological lines, with the 3 more liberal justices arguing against this. Justice Sonia Sotomayor writing that this gives a green light, in her view, to overturn precedent and, in her words, sow chaos. Now, Texas obviously sees it differently. The AG posting this is a huge win over the Biden administration and the ACLU, who have both been fighting this law. Julia Ainsley is following this now for us. So listen, the Supreme Court is returning this case to an appeals court. It could still be blocked at some point in the future, but the immediate impact is that the Supreme Court's decision allows Texas to put this law into effect.
Yeah, that's right. They are not weighing in on the merits of the case, but they have removed the stay where they will allow this law to go forward. Now, we are hearing tonight, Hallie, right as we come on air, that Texas Department of Public Safety has not put a date in place yet of when they'll start implementing this. So it might not be immediate, but it could still be tomorrow. It could still be in the coming days. This could happen very quickly. They believe they are prepared for this. Whether or not every local law enforcement across the state of Texas is prepared, they'll have to determine that individually. But there is a reason the White House and advocates have said that they're worried this will sow chaos and confusion if they all of a sudden turn this law on overnight. And that's what the Supreme Court is allowing to happen now, pending further oral arguments or a different decision. They think that lifting the stay and allowing this law to go forward will somehow ease any harm, although a lot of people will say it will do more harm than good.
There's some interesting pieces to this, right? Because let's say this law does go into effect, and as we think it likely will, unless the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals takes more action. You have some reporting here. If Texas tries to deport, let's say, somebody back to Mexico, Mexico's saying we're not going to accept that.
You get your emails fast, Hallie. Yeah, we just got that in from the Mexican top official who says that they will not take anyone that Mexico is deporting. In other words, they don't think that that comes with the same authority as someone who's been deported by the United States, by the federal government. And again, these deportations will have come from a Texas state judge, someone who hasn't been trained on what allows someone to stay legally in the United States, what they need to do to prove asylum. And it's not clear that those judges have received any kind of training in federal immigration law.
The other thing, Julia, too, and we referenced this, and we've been talking about this over the course of the last 24 hours as we've been watching the Supreme Court's action on this. This could go beyond simply Texas, right? This could go beyond simply border states, and it could go beyond the issue of immigration when you talk about the power that the federal government has versus states.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of states watching this tonight, Hallie, to see how Texas will act and whether or not they'll be able to continue this into the foreseeable future. Then you could see other states, Republican-led most likely, but some states that aren't even at the border, well, they will allow their officers to start targeting people who they suspect might be in the country illegally. That could be people who aren't recent border crossers, but people who have been living in this country for decades, many of them working here, sending their kids to school here, some even paying taxes. It could really open up a really wide discretion for a lot of law enforcement officers and prosecutors and judges who really aren't well versed in this law at all because it's not a local law.
Julia Ainsley, live for us here in Washington. Thank you. Let's take you to Mississippi now and some developing news from that state. A sentence for one of 6 ex-officers, part of a self-proclaimed Goon Squad, for his role in a racist attack on 2 black men. We're talking about Hunter Elward. You see him here. Set to serve about 20 years in federal prison. He is the first to be sentenced out of these 6 deputies who pleaded guilty to involvement in a horrific attack last January. That's when prosecutors say the officers burst into the home of these 2 men without a warrant and assaulted them with stun guns, a sex toy, pouring milk and alcohol on their faces, forcing them to strip naked. Elward, the one sentenced today, even admitted to what's been called a mock execution that went wrong when he shot one of them in the mouth. The group then came up with a cover-up, planting drugs and a gun. One of the victims today saying while he doesn't forgive these now former officers, he does feel a little safer now.
If you wouldn't have got caught, you'd keep doing the same thing. Feel somewhat safer. Like sun coming out. This scar never go away.
That scar will never go away. He says, I want to bring in Antonia Hilton for more on this, not just physical scars, but obviously traumatic emotional ones, too, after what happened. Talk to us about what we're hearing from the community with this development today.
Well, Hallie, I was actually just speaking with one black community organizer, a mom and voter in the area who was outraged and disgusted by all of this. To many people in Mississippi, this case really represents a relic of what they had hoped was a bygone era. And look, this is something that people are who don't even know these men. They are feeling mentally and emotionally impacted by. And it sent these shockwaves through because, you know, the Goon Squad is involved in many other cases. The local DA now, as a result of everything that you just laid out there, is going to have to go through all the cases that these 6 men have been involved in and attached to and potentially unravel them. That could, of course, lead to more people getting their day in court or their freedom. But that is going to cause immense pain, new revelations certainly to come in the next few months, maybe even years, as all of this is processed by the community in the Rankin County and Jackson area. Take a listen to one of the victim's supporters today talking about what all of this means.
Their fight, their bravery, their courage is the only reason we're standing here today, and it's justice for all black people. Hopefully a new trend of where black people in Mississippi and all over our country, when we're brutalized by police, we receive justice just like everyone else.
You know, Hallie, even in spite of the anger people feel, one of the victims stood up in court today and actually said to Elward that I forgive you.
Which is just such a powerful sentiment here. When you look at the rest of the so-called Goon Squad, Antonia, what's next for them?
Well, they are going to be sentenced. All 6 of them have pled guilty to these charges. These are incredibly serious federal charges. So looking at 20 years for Elward and something similar to that, very likely for the rest of these men in the coming days, Hallie. And that is what the community wants, maximum time behind bars.
Yeah. Antonia Hilton, thank you very much for your coverage of this one. New in just the last hour, former President Trump defending what he said about Jewish Democrats. Comments called out as anti-Semitic. Here's what he said right after voting in tonight's Florida primaries. Watch.
I think that the Democrats have been very, very opposed to Jewish people. That's true, and to Israel. All you have to do is look at Senator Schumer. What he did with Israel is a disgrace, and I think Israel will probably not forget it very soon. It's a very sad situation.
Okay, so this is what's coming just a day after an interview with a former staffer where Mr. Trump made those inflammatory comments. Listen.
Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion, they hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
We got team coverage here on this primary night. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is up in Bay Village, Ohio. But I want to start with Vaughn Hilliard out for us in Phoenix. And I want to start with you here. These new kind of comments here. You saw former President Trump there speaking now after voting in Florida, defending a lot of what he said over the course of the last 72 hours. The defense itself is not surprising, Vaughn, but there is a spotlight, of course, as he is now the presumptive nominee of his party on the things that he says moving forward.
Right, and this is the Donald Trump that we have heard echo similar rhetoric for years now, dating back to his first 2015 run, but even in the Oval Office back in 2019. I just want to read you part of Donald Trump said explicitly at the time, I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. That was 4 years ago in the Oval Office while he was president. And this comes at a time when we are just 7 months away from a general election. I want to let you listen to Doug Emhoff, the first gentleman, of course, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, who is Jewish himself, responding to the former president's comments. Take a listen.
This is a disgusting, toxic, anti-Semitic thing to say by anyone, let alone a former president of the United States, and it must be condemned.
In Donald Trump, even in the last month since the Hamas attack on Israel, telling Americans that if they do not vote for him to become the next president of the United States, it would be the end of Israel. Donald Trump, of course, talking in very dire terms. Hallie.
There's also this other piece of news coming out tonight. We know that his lawyers say he cannot pay this $464 million bond stemming from a recent case. Let me play how he responded to that piece of it, because that's made big news this last day.
This was a rigged trial by a crooked judge and a crooked attorney general, and we're fighting it out with them. We have a lot of cash and we have a great company, but they want to take it away, or at least take the cash element away. Billions of dollars in value, billions of dollars in properties, but they'd like to take the cash away so I can't use it on the campaign.
And just to say, right, there's no evidence that this was a rigged situation, as the former president says. He has not presented any either. He says that they want a lot of cash, or he's got a lot of cash. The issue is that his lawyers say he can't actually pay his bond. How much do you think, or have we seen this be an impact to voters who may have backed him back in 2016 because he ran as a successful, rich businessman?
Right, and he's got that Monday deadline as it stands right now, whether he likes it or not. He's got to figure out a way, or else the New York Attorney General has said that she will begin the efforts through the courts to begin seizing his assets, including property. But when you talk to the voters here, look, I have not talked to anybody who has batted an eye at suggesting that, Donald Trump has $500 million of liquid cash on hand. There's, his own attorney in a court filing yesterday suggesting that there's not a single American who would have such liquidity ready to pay off such damages as this. Even Mark Cuban, who has been a staunch critic of Donald Trump on social media here today, suggesting the same thing. And so, I want to let you listen to two voters that we talked to here that came to vote in this presidential primary today, because what I'm continually finding is the fact that by and large, the opinion of Donald Trump is baked in. His supporters defend him to the core, and those critics those critics of him in the past who willingly voted for a Democrat despite being Republicans suggest that they're willing to do the same thing this go around. So, Donald Trump's going to need to win over a certain percentage of those, and having to pay $500 million in the form of an appeal bond or cash only makes that more difficult for him as we look at a general election just a little over 7 months from now, Hallie.
The other interesting piece of this, Vaughn, I think that was Melania Trump standing alongside her husband. We haven't seen much of her at this campaign trail season, I guess, and that's kind of an understatement.
No, we haven't seen her. She wasn't even there back in November of 2022 when he announced his presidential run in 2024. You hardly have seen her at all alongside her husband. This is a marked moment here, for a general election nominee. Typically, you see them with their spouse, but also I think it's important context within the last week too, Hallie, that the fact that former Vice President Mike Pence, his former right hand, through the course of his first administration, just in the last week, also said that he's not going to endorse his former boss, Donald Trump. So this is perhaps an unusual election year, if that. Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, 7 months to go. Appreciate it. Thank you. Jesse, I want to go to you now because an unusual election year and an unusual election night where you are in Ohio with polls getting ready to close. There's a bunch of contests, right? Not just Ohio, but 5 other states that are actually voting. And I got to be honest, it's less pointless than it seems because I can hear people's voices, right, saying, well, wait a second, Hallie, we already have the presumptive nominees in President Biden and former President Trump here. Why should I care about tonight's primaries? There's a few reasons why people should care, right? We're going to show them here on screen. First, it sets up, right, this idea of a crucial Senate race for both parties, where you are in Ohio, one that could determine the balance of power in the Senate in 2025. It's going to be the first real test of the clout of a Trump endorsement. And then it's also the first opportunity for folks to really get a sense from voters post-presumptiveness. In other words, since the clinching of the nominations by both these men. So, Jesse, with that, I turn it over to you. I get why Ohioans care, right? But people across the country are likely to care about this, too.
Yeah, just a small conversation we're having here. You take me back to Schoolhouse Rock. The president doesn't do everything on their own in Washington, right? It matters who's in Congress, and the balance of power in Congress could potentially be decided, at least in part, by what unfolds here in Ohio. And what we're looking at right now is the Senate primary and the Republican Party here. And this is really setting up a divide between the new brand of MAGA Republicans and what you think of as the more traditional, old-school establishment Republican wings of the party. The former president has endorsed Bernie Moreno, a businessman. On the other side, you have State Senator Matt Dolan, who has the endorsement of the governor. There is a third candidate, the Secretary of State here in Ohio, Frank LaRose. But if you turned on a TV over the last couple of days, you would think this is a two-man race between Dolan and Moreno. So you have those two different factions of the party. And what we've gotten an early indicator of data, Hallie. I know we love data when it comes in the hard numbers, and we're going to look at some exit polling that's showing that most of the Republican primary voters in Ohio feel that it is important that the next senator for Ohio support former President Trump. And so that connectivity seems to be important with most of the voters who are casting a ballot today. And so when you factor that in, you wonder how much that endorsement will matter. And even though he doesn't have the former president's endorsement, State Senator Matt Dolan has said that he is someone who agrees with Trump policy but takes a different stance on the rhetoric. We've been talking with voters as well. Here's some of what we've heard from some, starting with someone who was at a Bernie Moreno event.
I think he's the best for the country to sustain our freedom and our rights and to close the border.
I would not vote for Bernie Moreno.
And why is that?
Because Trump backs him. I can't back any candidate that Trump backs, period.
So you can see some split there, and that also leaves a question for the fall. Can the Republican Party keep up enthusiasm and keep the coalition together, even if the candidate some voters didn't want wins tonight, Hallie?
And just real quick, Jesse, there's also this kind of interesting oopsie moment where a Republican candidate in your state conceded before polls closed, but then retracted the concession. What?
Yeah, you can see the memes potentially coming, Hallie. So Derek Myers was a congressional candidate out of Chillicothe here in Ohio, and his campaign accidentally, they say, sent out early a concession announcement saying that they, lost the race. And the explanation from the campaign is that they preloaded a winning announcement and a losing announcement, and they went to have a draft ready, but instead they hit send now, and then they sent out an explanation of all this, which included a typo, which is going to probably have a little bit of life on the internet. So it's something that you don't want to be seeing happening, but things happen on election night, Hallie.
You hate when it makes it out of the drafts folder when it didn't mean to. You know what I mean? Jesse Kirsch, live for us there in Ohio. Thank you so much. So listen, stop me if you've heard this one before, but the clock is ticking for Congress as they race for the 6th time this year to avoid a government shutdown by the end of the week. It's not you, folks. You are not having deja vu. Yes, we are in the potential for a shutdown mode again, but there's reason for hope. There is a glimmer of optimism with President Biden and congressional leaders today announcing there's a deal to lock in funding for the rest of the fiscal year, which ends in September. This latest deal has to do with some really important stuff, right? It would avoid shutting down the State Department, the Defense Department, Labor, Homeland Security. And that last one, Homeland Security, apparently the thorn in negotiator sides. That's part of why it's taken so long to get to this point. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is following this one for us. Okay, so Sahil, hope springs eternal that the government will continue to function at least past Friday night.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. The time crunch, however, is getting very real, to the point that it wouldn't surprise me if congressional offices start writing 2 statements for whether there will or won't be a shutdown and how they react. And the reason is we are 72 hours away from, at minimum, from a vote in the House. Speaker Johnson has said he's going to give his members that amount of time to read it. And that means text has to come out today, by tonight, in order for this to get out of the House by Friday. And then it has to go to the Senate, where there is a whole other set of hurdles. So the possibility of a brief shutdown is very real at this point. And let's take a look at what that would mean. It would mean on the IRS, more than 50% of employees are furloughed. During the height of tax season, the DOD active duty service members would be working without pay. They would get back pay, but of course no one wants this to happen. In the DHS, TSA employees would be working without pay during spring break travel, and the Department of Education, 89% of employees would be furloughed. Now, the Senate is on the brink of a 2-week recess starting next week. That usually tends to be very motivating for members to try to provide that unanimous consent required to hold a speedy vote. I just spoke a few moments ago to Senator Lisa Murkowski, an Alaska Republican, who said, quote, "This is the United States Senate. We're motivated by recesses," unquote. In other words, that could be the ace in the hole to getting it out of the Senate quickly.
God, Sahil, who among us not motivated by recess? Aren't we all motivated by recess? The interesting thing here is, like, Congress, fine, they'll avoid a shutdown. It looks like this time. They usually have like a year to get ducks in a row for the next one. But the deadline here, because it's been kind of kick the can, the next fiscal year only starts in September, 6 months from now. Like, that's another universe away, right? We'll be just a couple of months before, obviously, the presidential elections, but it's a shorter runway.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's very late in the fiscal year to be arguing about the current bill, given that it's halfway done and Congress already needs to be thinking about fiscal 2025 spending bills. Now, the big question, Hallie, is how much they're going to try to change things, right? This one was very contentious because since the previous spending bill, the previous appropriations bill, Republicans took control of the House of Representatives, and they wanted major changes, which Democrats obviously resisted. This deadline on the next time is going to come just about 6 weeks before the presidential election. No one's really going to want a shutdown, and the configuration of Congress is not going to change. So it's very likely that they mostly keep the status quo going, either literally through a continuing resolution or largely through another appropriations bill.
Sahil Kapoor live for us there at the Capitol tonight. Sahil, thank you. We're learning more tonight about the search for a missing college student who disappeared more than 10 days ago after leaving a bar on a frat trip to Nashville. Listen to what we're hearing from Riley Strain's father with this emotional message to his son.
We're still here, bud. We're looking for you. We want to take you home for graduation.
It's after this really short interaction was caught on police body cam footage. We told you about it last night between Riley Strain and Nashville police. Watch.
How you doing, sir? I'm good. How are you? Good.
A police department spokesperson says as of now, there are no signs of foul play. Kathy Park is joining us now. Kathy, there was some talk about a text message that Strain allegedly sent. What's the latest on that? Where do things stand with the investigation and with his family's desperate search now?
Yeah, Hallie. So in regards to that text message, Chris Dingman is a close family friend. I had a chance to speak with him earlier this afternoon, and he apparently got wind of this last text exchange from Riley and a girl that he was dating. And apparently he wrote her back saying good lobs because the girl asked him how he was doing that night, and good lops. It wasn't very clear exactly what he meant by that. And Chris, the friend, the close family friend, was saying, listen, Riley is, he's very articulate, so it's a little bizarre. So he thought it was cryptic. However, earlier today, I spoke with family members. His stepfather asked him exactly, could he elaborate on this text message? And he couldn't. He said, look, Riley had a lot of communication with several people that evening, and he doesn't necessarily want to muddy the investigation. Take a listen.
We know that Riley was possibly texting and communicating with multiple people. Again, we don't know the exact people. We don't know the exact timeline, or who the last person was.
And Hallie, we learned at this press conference that the search efforts will be ramping up thanks to volunteers. We heard from the United Cajun Navy members will be here this week. They're planning on bringing 2 boats to kind of comb through the Cumberland River. I'm staring at the Cumberland River right now. Broadway is right behind me. Luke Bryan's bar, that was the last location where Riley was seen before he left us before 10 p.m. on March 8th. That was his last stop, and you probably have seen the surveillance footage over the last couple of days. You have seen him stumbling, falling at times, and then there is that body camera footage that was released by Nashville PD where he has that brief interaction with an officer, and he doesn't appear distressed during that interaction. And you're taking a look at the map of kind of where his whereabouts, his last movements were the night of March 8th, and it's all kind of within a 1-mile radius. But officials did tell us that most of their search efforts will be centered near the riverbank, near the embankment, right by the Cumberland River, because that is the last location where Riley was seen. Hallie?
Kathy Park, thank you very much. Live for us there in Nashville. An NBC News exclusive tonight with the head of the FAA warning about the safety culture at Boeing in a one-on-one with our own Lester Holt. Listen.
You recently paid a visit to Boeing. We were able to see some of their manufacturing process. What were some of your impressions?
Well, my impressions were similar to the culture survey that just got completed at Boeing and our audit, which is that there are issues around the safety culture at Boeing, that their priorities have been on production and not on safety and quality. And so what we really are focused on now is shifting that focus from production to safety and quality.
That audit he's referring to, of course, is the FAA's investigation into Boeing's production, where it found dozens of problems. We asked Boeing for a response to that, but we haven't heard back. That said, in a recent statement, Boeing has said they continue to, you see it here, implement immediate changes and develop a comprehensive action plan to strengthen safety and quality. This whole thing spun up this year, started really this year with this absolutely wild moment. You see it here, when a door plug blew off mid-flight. Since then, there have been a series of issues. A United plane landing without a panel in Oregon, a big mid-air drop or shake during a LATAM Airlines flight. 50 people hurt. Most recently, an Alaska Airlines plane's windshield getting a little crack in it while descending into Portland from Reagan. Now, listen, all of those things happen on Boeing planes. Important to note, that doesn't necessarily mean it's Boeing's fault. We're going to get into that with CNBC's Phil LeBeau, who's joining us now. Let me play a bit more of that interview between Lester and the FAA administrator.
What were certain protocols? Those were not being met in terms of how they approached production of the airplanes?
Not what you would have expected if safety is the first priority. Whenever someone comes into the FAA to brief on their company, the first thing I expect is to talk about safety, because we all have to start there. If it's not safe, then the whole system is not working the way it should.
So given all this, Phil, how does Boeing move forward from this?
Well, 2 things. One, they're putting together a plan for updating the safety culture as well as quality controls. They will present that to the FAA and regulators within the next 90 days. And then the FAA will talk with them about, what are you doing? Are you making all of the moves that need to be made? And in the meantime, Hallie, there are more FAA inspectors on the ground at the plant in Renton, Washington, where the 737 MAX is built. So they have more scrutiny than ever before to make sure that Boeing is doing the right things. Those are two things near term that Boeing needs to do in order to ensure that it is meeting the requirements that you would expect for an aircraft coming out of that plant.
There's also the piece of this. I mean, we have to think back, obviously, the crashes 5 years ago. That was really, I think, the start of some of these problems with Boeing. But this other point, right, that some of these issues perhaps are more happening at the hands of the airlines than of Boeing itself, right? Can you explain that?
Correct. Correct. Remember about a week and a half ago, there was the video of the plane taking off and a wheel fell off of it. That plane was 20 years old. That has nothing to do with the manufacturing at Boeing. And some of these other instances are with older aircraft that have been in airline fleets for a number of years. Doesn't diminish the significance or the fact that they are a little scary when you see those incidents, but it also is not necessarily a Boeing issue, more of an airline maintenance issue.
Phil LeBeau, we're glad to have you. Thank you very much. And, of course, you can watch more of Lester's exclusive interview there tonight on Nightly News, 6:30 Eastern, wherever you watch your local NBC station. Coming up, a scary chase caught on camera. What had people running in the streets of Slovakia? Look at that. Plus, there might be a railroad on the moon soon. We'll explain. Russian athletes pretty fired up tonight, responding to the International Olympic Committee decision today to not let Russian or Belarusian athletes participate in the opening ceremony at Paris, with those athletes calling it unacceptable, calling IOC leaders, their words, crazy. That announcement happening as the IOC also sent out a warning to countries around the world about Russia's cynical attempt, as they see it, to bring politics into sport. At issue, the so-called Friendship Games that are supposed to launch weeks after the Summer Games in Paris. Russia, of course, behind those Friendship Games. The IOC wants other governments not to participate. They say athletes are being exploited by propaganda. We know Russia's gotten more and more isolated from international sports, frozen out of some of these big competitions after it invaded Ukraine. And complicating that relationship, Russia's track record with breaking anti-doping rules. Maura Barrett is joining us now. It's not a great track record for Russia. This is now the second time that they're trying to come out and launch these Friendship Games. Talk to us about that and how these doping concerns tie into it all.
Yeah, Hallie, the Friendship Games in heavy quotes here, right? Because this is something that's very controversial coming up against the Olympics. And basically, Russia's trying to say that it's an opportunity for their athletes to compete on the international stage. And that's because they've been barred from competing as a team in the Olympics. Now, in terms of the plans coming up, you'll see it on your screen here. They're looking for a Summer Friendships Games just a month after the Olympics in Moscow. And then they want to do something similar in 2026 in the winter over in Sochi. And they're actually also offering a prize fund of the equivalent of $50 million for athletes to compete. And so when you take all of those details into account, along with the controversy around Russia and the fact that the Olympics now are not letting anybody that supports the war against Ukraine compete this summer, that kind of folds into the whole sports washing debate that we've been talking about. It's very similar to what we've seen before and very recently in other countries embroiled in controversy. It happened in 2022 in Qatar with that FIFA World Cup, and that was amid a lot of allegations, controversy over how migrants were building the sports stadium, concerns over how they treat women. It was a similar story in the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing, as well as the Live Golf League in Saudi Arabia, which is funded and run by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And so this is something that we've been watching consistently, especially in international sports. The Foreign Minister of Affairs in Russia, however, is kind of brushing it off, attributing it to Russophobia on behalf of the International Olympic Committee. But the thing is the IOC has a real argument around the anti-doping scandal of it all. We know there's been endless drama around Russia and its ability to hold up to what they call the doping standards. Basically, they put out a statement as well, talking about how, because we've seen issues in the past, they said they show total disrespect for the global anti-doping standards and the integrity of competitions. They also point out the fact that there's the possibility that Russian athletes potentially competing in both in the neutral, independent athlete section that the Olympics are allowing could be competing both in midsummer and later in the summer, which only increases the potential that they could be doping, which then calls into question what we've talked about many times before, Hallie.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much for that breakdown. Some new research just out lays out the consequences of one of the pandemic's biggest decisions, school closures. Remember, just 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago, just this month, kids all across the country, K-12, college students too, they all went online only to learn. The thought that it would keep students safe without decreasing the kind of education they got. But the numbers we're seeing now show that's not exactly how it worked out. Here's our breakdown.
Officials from red states.
The state will have an extended spring break.
To blue.
Something I could not in a million years have imagined having to do.
All making the same hard choice, shutting down schools to stop the spread of, at the time, an unknown and deadly virus.
3,000 deaths already nationwide.
The science behind the consequences, not exactly certain.
But I don't have a good explanation or solution to the problem of what happens when you close schools and it triggers a cascade of events.
New research finding what does happen. The shutdowns coming at a steep cost to students.
What we're seeing is that the pandemic is really acting as a compounding debt. It's keeping kids from being able to progress as they enter new levels within the education system at the typical rates we would expect.
Start with the learning loss. A study led by researchers at Harvard and Stanford found school districts that spent most of the 2020 to 2021 school year remote saw students fall more than half a grade behind in math on average, more than districts that spent most of the year in person. Lower income students ended up hurt the most, whether they went back to school sooner or stayed mostly at home that year. Politics also playing a role. Republican-led states reopening faster than those run by Democrats. Some of those red state governors, like Florida's Ron DeSantis, arguing his way worked.
We in Florida dragged the country out of lockdown.
Some Democrats and teachers unions standing by their approach.
We knew we had to be in school. We just wanted to be safe.
Question is, did closures slow COVID down? Data we now have shows people under 20 were half as likely to catch COVID, but not necessarily less likely to spread it. And experts we spoke with say the impact on stopping the spread depends on the school.
By the summer of 2020, we did have some data primarily from Europe showing that kids could be safely in school. But again, circumstances. Some schools were able to do that. Other schools just simply could not do it.
But the academic damage is done. And even now, national test scores from spring 2023 show students 3rd through 8th grade overall have not rebounded from what they lost in math. Experts say districts need to boost funding for tutoring or summer school to get those numbers back up.
The problem that we're seeing is that the dosage of the treatment does not match the scale of the crisis. Without those interventions, I think we will have no hope of getting kids out of this hole.
While the next major health crisis will probably have a whole new set of challenges, some argue there are valuable lessons learned.
We can't take the lessons specifically from COVID and say, what we learned there is exactly going to apply. But what we can do is build resiliency in our school system so that they are able to withstand this potential needing to stay open.
Dr. O'Leary, who you heard there, says if there's any one thing schools need to pay for now, it's ventilation, keeping that up to date to try to build resilience in schools for the next crisis. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, some breaking news out of Alabama, with Republicans there passing what could be the country's most comprehensive ban on DEI programs, according to the New York Times. Now, this bill wouldn't just stop state money for places that fund these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but it would limit teachers and what they can say about, in the bill's words, divisive concepts about race and gender. Democrats and civil rights groups have slammed the bill. Number 2. Northrop Grumman says the U.S. government's tasking it with developing the concept of a lunar railroad. Yes, a moon train, a moon metro. It's not imminent. Obviously, we don't have any video to show you because it doesn't exist yet. It's part of a 10-year study, apparently. So we will see on the construction timeline. There's the moon. Picturing a railroad network that would try to transport people and supplies. All right, we'll see. Number 3, the CDC is warning doctors about an increase in the number of measles cases in this country. Nearly 60 confirmed cases so far this year. That's the same number we saw all of last year, and it's only March. The agency says most of the instances this year are linked to international travel or to little kids who haven't gotten their vaccine yet. Number 4, are you smarter than a 5th grader? Travis Kelce might be asking you that very question with an Amazon Prime Video reboot in the works, according to Variety. Prime Video declined to comment. Kelce's agency could not be reached. We'll find out. Number 5, Richard Simmons is coming out today to clarify he is not, in fact, dying. Speculation that started when he posted yesterday on X saying, I'm quoting here, I am dying. He then followed up by saying, I can see your faces now. The truth is we are all dying. Every day we live, we are getting closer to our death. So seems to be an inspirational post to get people to live lives to their fullest. Richard Simmons apparently doing just that. When we come back, the company behind some pretty popular ice cream says it's getting out of the business. Why it says people are cutting back on their pints. Plus, Olympic organizers say they're going to lift one ban on athletes at this year's games. We'll explain. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our teams around the world have done it for you. Here's a look at what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of Hong Kong, a controversial new law passing today, giving the government more power to stamp out dissent. It's making crimes that officials there call threats to national security punishable by life in prison. We're talking about treason or insurrection. Critics of the law worry it's seriously threatening civil rights. Out of Slovakia, look at this, security cameras catching the moment. Look at all these people running. That's because there's a bear running through town. Very scary stuff. 5 people ended up hurt. You can see the bear sprinting down a street. Local media reported a similar bear attack just a few days before this. A woman actually fell to her death trying to get away. The bear has been relocated, apparently back to the woods. Out of France, the Olympics organizers say there's going to be like 9,000 athletes in the Olympic Village and 300,000 condoms. They're encouraging socializing among countries this year. Remember, last Olympics in Tokyo, there was a so-called intimacy ban because of the pandemic. Still no alcohol allowed there, though. So, this huge company, Unilever, that sells a lot of the stuff we buy, says it's getting out of the ice cream business, kind of. And one big reason, inflation. You'll still be able to buy your Ben & Jerry's, buy your Magnums. They make those chocolate-covered ice cream bars, Klondike bars. But Unilever is spinning all this off into a different company. It says people are cutting back on ice cream because of these inflationary prices. It's part of a bigger move by Unilever to cut costs, as it's laying off 7,500 workers as well. Brian Chung is joining us now. The markets seem to like this, right? And that's what we've generally seen when you look at what companies do with layoffs, right? At the same time, there's a really interesting inflationary impact here, too. Talk us through it.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, this is not unprecedented. We saw this with Kraft Heinz when they spun off their snack business in the form of Mondelez. But yeah, the news today is that Unilever plans on spinning off its ice cream businesses, which includes the Ben & Jerry's brand. It includes Magnum as well. And, you know, one reason for this is because they say that it's just not one of their more profitable businesses. So Bloomberg crunched the numbers, and the profit margins on the ice cream business is substantially smaller than the other things that it sells. So again, those profits less than half what it makes compared to the personal care products which they sell. And again, Unilever is a huge conglomerate. So let's take a look at some of the other types of products that they do sell. We're thinking of soaps. We're thinking of skincare products, right? These are, in some cases, deodorant, right? So these are very familiar brands to people, but you'll notice not a lot of these are foods. And it's not that they're worried about getting, you know, vanilla ice cream in the soaps themselves, but they are saying, well, by divesting these brands, we can focus a little bit more on the things that don't require large fridges to deliver from one side of the world to the other. So they say this would simplify their business. And again, there's always money usually involved in these types of things as well. So they see it as maybe a way to increase profits going forward, Hallie.
You also talk about Ben & Jerry's, Brian. It's interesting because that's been kind of a political brand. It decided not to sell in Israeli-occupied territories. It called for the return of what it called stolen indigenous land. It's not, Ben & Jerry's has been political. They've been, you know, not uncomfortable doing that. How much does that factor into a bigger parent company like Unilever when they make their decisions on brands?
Well, the Unilever announcement on this didn't mention any of that. But to your point, there have been instances in the past where there have been legal hiccups where you actually had some of the subsidiary companies like Ben & Jerry's lobbying lawsuits at the parent company, Unilever, over some of the things that you mentioned. What happened in Israel is one example where the subsidiary of Ben & Jerry's that was in Israel was protesting the way that Unilever was trying to essentially force them into selling their products in what Israel claimed to be their occupied territories, like in the West Bank. Ben & Jerry's didn't want to do so. There were legal holdups that were resulted as of that action. So again, these are things that happened in the past. They happened in 2022. Unilever's not citing that in the announcement today, but of course you do wonder whether or not that was perhaps some of the reason behind the decision to ultimately announce today that they want to spin off the ice cream brand, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you very much for that. Coming up, why more people are turning to medication abortion now. What we're learning from these new numbers ahead of arguments in a high-stakes Supreme Court case on how people can actually access an abortion pill. That's next. We're learning today that medication abortions in this country have gone up in the time since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. This is according to some new data from the Guttmacher Institute. That's a research group that supports abortion access. The report finds last year there were more than 150,000 more medication abortions than in 2020. These kinds of abortions have been on the rise for a long time, for decades, really. You see the numbers there. They make up something like 60% of all abortions in this country, up from 10% just about in 2001. This comes as the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments next week in a case that could decide whether one of the most commonly used abortion pills, mifepristone, could stay easily accessible. Berkeley Loveless is on this. He's with me now. Talk us through some of these new numbers now on medication abortion. What are they telling us?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So there were sharp increases in states, bordering states, with complete abortion. So there's at least 14 states with complete abortion bans. There's a handful of other states with restrictions on abortions. And the sharpest increases were seen in places like New Mexico, which borders Texas, and then Illinois, which borders Missouri. And they were seen to have the most increases. So that means people are traveling out of state to get abortion care.
And so we laid out that map of sort of where this is happening. How do the Supreme Court arguments next week play into this issue of access to medication abortion?
Yeah, so doctors and patients are really concerned about this. So they say there's going to be huge ramifications if the Supreme Court does decide to limit access for this drug. So Dr. I spoke with said most of his patients prefer medication abortion. It provides a level of privacy, and it's also especially great for people with disabilities who may not be able to travel to get their medication. And so sometimes this is the only option that they have for the drug as well. There's also concerns if they limit access, this could also push people into a black market, and there's some safety concerns about that. And then there's also concerns about the FDA's authority to regulate drugs. So the FDA has said since 2000 that this drug is safe and effective. And this could, if the Supreme Court decides this way, hurt the FDA's authority to approve drugs in the future. But this is all just oral arguments next week. This is not a decision from the Supreme Court. So we're just going to hear from the two sides.
It'll be arguments next week and then maybe a decision, we think, at the end of the term, towards the end of the term, roughly.
Yeah,
we don't know for sure. But
we don't know for sure.
Yeah, okay. Berkeley Loveless, obviously a lot of implications on that, a lot of threads to pull together. Thank you for your reporting on this. Still to come here on the show, new questions about an old picture of the royals. What our photo editor is finding in a portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth. More drama here coming up. It is peak bloom here in Washington. That means that the cherry blossoms around the tidal basin and elsewhere are absolutely spectacular, and everybody's showing up to see him. But the biggest star? Stumpy, a social media sensation, a mascot, actually. We're about to show him to you. There he is. There it is. Pretty decrepit, a little crooked, but then again, this is Washington, but inspirational. A reminder, you don't have to be classically beautiful to be beloved, and Stumpy sure is. Tons of people coming out to take their Stumpy selfies now. He looks like this. This tree looks like this because the National Park Service says rising sea levels are sending salty water, flooding the shores of the tidal basin. You see how close Stumpy is to the water there? That's not good for cherry trees. It's already killed a lot of the trees right around Stumpy. So to fix the seawall, to rebuild it, the National Park Service says it has to cut down 140 of the roughly 1,700 cherry trees that ring the basin there. And yes, Stumpy is on the chopping block. That's a blow to some of the folks showing up to say their final goodbyes to this little tree. I was out there today chatting with some of them. Listen. What do you think?
It's so beautiful. We were just talking about how inspirational it was.
Why?
She's dead on the inside and alive on the outside.
What do you think of Stumpy?
He's Stumpy. It's so sad it's going, but I understand why. But it's still sad.
It's famous.
It's Stumpy.
Those people, by the way, came in from Western PA just to see Stumpy. I met somebody who drove up from Richmond just to feast their eyes on this short king. R.I.P. Stumpy. Not gone yet, but you're running out of time to see him. Here's the good news, though. Cuttings from Stumpy will be used by arborists to create genetic clones, essentially, and then replanted, so eventually new cherry trees will grow. If you can't tell, I'm on the Stumpy beat today. You'll see more of that tonight on NBC Nightly News, wherever you get your local NBC station. All right, let's talk about what's happening overseas, because Getty is issuing yet another editor's note on yet another photo of the royal family for what it calls digital enhancements. And one of our NBC News photo editors ran an analysis on the picture you're about to see right here, right? This is the late Queen with her great-grandchildren, a picture taken by Kate Middleton, released last year. And there were some Photoshop issues, right? Some Photoshop fails, circling them in red. You can see them right here, where the patterns of the clothing and the furniture just don't seem to match up. There are some other possible problems, too. A chunk of one of the grandkids' cheek that seems to be cut out, and this sort of strange dark area behind the neck of this other great-grandkid here. Remember, it's just about a week ago, the Kensington Palace posted a different picture of Kate Middleton and her kids that big news organizations had to take down because they said it was manipulated. Matt Bradley is following it from London and joins us now. Matt, if I was on the Stumpy beat, you were on the Royals beat big time, right? And this is just yet another development here about the way that, and I think looking at the big picture, the way that the palace tries to present itself and present the royals, they can't always control what the message is, especially at a moment like this when there's all these conspiracies, all these controversies around Kate Middleton, questions about these photos, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that what we're finding here is exactly what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks here, Hallie. I mean, they tried to weigh in, they tried to control the message, but they're trying to do it in a way, interestingly, that's kind of like the old palace, the old system. You know, they manage the media very, very effectively. If you've ever covered the royals, it's all very tightly choreographed. Everybody has their place. Everything is with badges and, you know, everything is done very, very well, very professionally. They might have thought that they could manage this situation, and this situation is unmanageable, and it's just showing because they've pulled this thread, and now social media is still pulling the same thread and coming up with more and more goods over and over again. So this is something that, you know, it just goes to show their growing pains. You know, they were dealing with traditional media. They could call up the editor of the Daily Mail or the Sun and talk to them and explain things to them, threaten them with lawsuits, which they've done very many times. You can't call up social media. There's no one to call. They thought that, in a way. It looked like they were trying to do that, and they failed.
Prince William, you know, file this under the, you know, keep calm and carry on mantra, I guess, because Prince William is going forward with his royal duties just a few hours ago, showing up at an event. He didn't talk about sort of everything that's happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that he can say. And, you know, I think this is kind of part of what we're talking about here. You know, it looks as though maybe the palace has decided that maybe they should just kind of let this ride until Easter, which was the date that they gave back in January, saying that they weren't going to give updates on Kate Middleton. She would be returning to work after Easter. I think maybe they have decided that they shouldn't throw more good money after bad, that they should maybe not say anything for the time being, let Easter come and go, let Kate Middleton decide whether or not she's going to make a public appearance to her many, many adoring fans who really want to see her, and just let it ride, because at this point, trying to manage a social media situation just hasn't been working out for them, and this latest revelation, more evidence of that.
Matt Bradley, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.